A single sentence at the office party changed my career. My coworker tried to use it to embarrass me. The attempt backfired completely. Everyone turned on her instead. It was an outcome I did not expect. I had been silent for a very long time. I thought silence was the correct response. It turned out that one sentence was better. My name is Laura Bennett. I am 42 years old. I work for a large corporation. My position is in mid-level management. I am good at my job. I have a reputation for being calm. I am also known as competent and professional. I consistently deliver results for my team and for the company. I focus on the work itself. I avoid office politics. I do not engage in drama. My approach has always been to remain quiet. People at work know me as reliable. They also see me as quiet, which sometimes leads them to underestimate me. I was aware of this perception. I did not try to change it. My colleague is Amanda Pierce. She is 39. She works in a similar management role. We are peers in the corporate structure. Our departments often collaborate. Amanda is very ambitious. She is also highly competitive. She constantly seeks validation from our superiors. Attention from leadership is important to her. She is very driven by status within the company. I noticed that she viewed me as competition. This became clear over several months. I did not feel the same way about her. I was focused on my own responsibilities. Her behavior toward me was often passive-aggressive. She made subtle comments in meetings. She would try to undermine my contributions. I recognized what she was doing. I chose not to react to it. I believed professionalism was the best course of action. I thought my work record would protect my reputation. The company held a mandatory corporate party. These events were important. All the executives were there. Managers from every department attended. Key business partners were also invited. It was a significant networking event. Reputations mattered a great deal in that room. Amanda saw the party as an opportunity. She planned to embarrass me publicly. She wanted to do it in front of senior leadership. She wanted our colleagues to witness it. She had been undermining me for months. This was her chance to do it on a larger scale. She assumed I would react as I always had. She expected me to stay quiet. She thought I would just absorb the humiliation. I knew she saw me as a rival. I had observed her pattern of testing boundaries. She did this often in group settings. She would make a small, challenging comment. She would then watch how people reacted. If no one pushed back, she would become bolder the next time. My consistent non-reaction had made her bold. She believed she could say anything without consequence. She was wrong about that. There were things I did not know. I did not know that several executives already trusted my work. They valued my integrity. I was not aware of their specific opinions of me. I just did my job and hoped for the best. I also did not know that other people had noticed Amanda's behavior. Her ambition was not a secret. Her methods were quietly disliked by many of our colleagues. I thought I was the only one who saw the full pattern. The information Amanda planned to use against me was flawed. It was either incomplete or based on a false assumption. She believed she had found a weakness. She was confident in her attack. The escalation of her behavior was gradual. It started with small incidents. At first, I dismissed them. I thought I was misinterpreting her actions. We were in a weekly planning meeting with our shared supervisor. I presented my team's progress on a key project. The data was positive. We were ahead of schedule. After I finished, Amanda spoke up. She asked if my projections accounted for a specific market variable. Her tone was helpful. The question itself was reasonable. But the way she asked it implied I had overlooked it. It was asked in front of our boss. It planted a small seed of doubt about my thoroughness. I confirmed that the variable was accounted for. I pointed to the line item in the report. Our supervisor nodded. The meeting moved on. I felt a brief moment of irritation. I recognized her tactic. She was not seeking information. She was trying to manage perceptions. She was positioning herself as more detailed-oriented. I decided to let it go. Confronting her about it would seem petty. It was a minor event. I focused back on the meeting. A week later, another incident occurred. We were on an email thread with several department heads. I had sent an update on a project timeline. Amanda replied to everyone on the thread. Her email rephrased a point I had already made. She presented it as a clarification. It was unnecessary. My original email was perfectly clear. Her email created the impression that she was correcting my work. It made it look like my communication was lacking. It was a subtle way to diminish my contribution. I saw her email come in. I read it several times. I considered my response. I could reply and state that the point was already covered. That would start a public back and forth. It would look unprofessional to the department heads. I could also ignore it. This would allow her small action to stand. It would let her control the final word on the topic. I chose to ignore it. I decided that the senior managers were busy. They probably would not analyze the email chain that closely. I put my faith in their ability to see through such behavior. I moved on to my next task. These small aggressions continued. They happened in meetings and emails and in casual conversations. Each one, in isolation, was deniable. She could always claim she was just trying to be helpful. She could always say it was a misunderstanding, but the pattern was undeniable. It was a consistent effort to chip away at my professional standing. She was building a case against my competence, one small comment at a time. Another time, we were discussing resource allocation for the next quarter. I had prepared a detailed proposal based on my team's needs and upcoming projects. My proposal was data-driven and realistic. During the presentation to management, Amanda offered an alternative budget. It was not a real alternative. She had taken my core numbers and shifted a few minor allocations. She then presented these small changes as a major strategic rethink. She used phrases that made her version sound more innovative. She positioned my proposal as safe, but uninspired. She positioned her version as forward-thinking. Our director listened to both presentations. He asked a few questions. In the end, the final approved budget was very close to my original proposal, but Amanda had successfully inserted herself into the process. She had made it seem like a collaboration. She had framed herself as an essential contributor to my plan. I felt a deep sense of frustration. My work was being co-opted. My ideas were being reframed as hers. But I did not speak up. I told myself that the outcome was what mattered. The project was funded. That was the win. I reasoned that fighting over credit was a waste of energy. I believed that true competence did not need to announce itself. I thought that, in the long run, the quality of my work would be what people remembered. I kept a log of these incidents for myself. I did not plan to show it to anyone. It was just for my own understanding. I wrote down the date, the situation, and what she did. The log grew longer. It showed a clear escalation. Her attempts became more frequent. They also became more public. She started making comments in larger group settings, beyond just our immediate team. I knew a confrontation was becoming inevitable. I just did not know what form it would take. I continued to believe that my quiet, professional approach was the strongest position. I thought that if I refused to play her game, I could not lose. This belief was about to be tested. The annual corporate party was announced. Attendance was mandatory for all management-level employees. I received the invitation. I added it to my calendar. I did not think much about it. For me, it was just another work obligation. It was a long evening of small talk and networking. I did not realize that for Amanda, this party was different. She saw it as a stage. And she had already written this script for a scene where I was the fool. She had been rehearsing for months. The corporate holiday party was a non-optional event. It was scheduled for a Thursday evening in early December, occupying a block on our shared calendars that was colored a festive but firm red. Attendance was not explicitly mandatory in the way a quarterly review was, but non-attendance was a data point that would be collected, analyzed, and noted by senior leadership. It was a test of commitment, a performance of team cohesion. I viewed it as another project deliverable. Show up, engage in 2 hours of professional-grade pleasantries, and confirm my existence within the corporate structure. My strategy of silence had served me for 7 months. It was a strategy born of efficiency. Direct confrontation with someone like Amanda required an expenditure of emotional and political capital that I deemed a poor investment. It would create departmental friction, necessitate meetings with human resources, and generate a narrative of interpersonal conflict. My work was clean, precise, and data-driven. I wanted my professional reputation to be the same. I operated on the belief that my value to the company was measured by the quality of my output, not the volume of my voice. This belief was about to be tested. The escalation began 2 weeks before the party. It was subtle. as all of Amanda's maneuvers were. We were assigned to the final analysis phase of Project Phoenix, a high-stakes initiative to overhaul our client retention protocols. My role was to process 3/4 of raw data to identify the key points of client attrition. It was meticulous, solitary work. It took me 4 days. I compiled my findings into a detailed report, complete with projections and actionable recommendations, and emailed it to our immediate team, including Amanda. The next morning, I was copied on an email from a senior vice president, Mr. Harrison. It was a reply to an email Amanda had sent him directly. She had attached my report, lightly reformatted, with a new cover page. Her email was a masterpiece of corporate appropriation. She wrote that after synthesizing the team's preliminary data, she had drilled down into the core metrics to develop a new strategic framework. She presented my conclusions as her own final analysis. My original report was reframed as mere raw material she had expertly refined. Mr. Harrison's reply was brief. He was impressed with the proactive initiative. He scheduled a presentation for the following week. He invited Amanda to lead it. He did not invite me. I read the email chain 3 times. My first impulse was biological, a tightening in my chest, a flush of heat. My second was analytical. I mapped the situation. Option A, forward my original email to Mr. Harrison demonstrating my prior work. This would expose Amanda, but it would also position me as petty and unable to handle conflict within my own team. It would disrupt the chain of command. It would be messy. Option B, confront Amanda directly. She would deny any malicious intent, claiming she was merely packaging the team's work for executive review, and that my exclusion from the presentation was an unfortunate oversight. It would be my word against hers. Messy. Option C was to do nothing. I would allow her to present my work. The work was solid. The data was accurate. The company would benefit and Project Phoenix would move forward. In the long run, the truth of authorship on such projects has a way of surfacing. The technical questions that would inevitably arise during and after the presentation would be beyond her depth. She would eventually have to defer to me. It was a long-term strategy. I chose option C. I archived the email chain in a private folder labeled Documentation. It was the 23rd entry in the folder. Amanda's confidence swelled. Now my silence was not interpreted as strategic patience, but as weakness. It was proof that I could be pushed. A week before the party, she approached me near the coffee station. Her posture was open, her smile calibrated for concern. She spoke in a low voice, creating a bubble of false intimacy. She said she was glad the Phoenix presentation had gone so well. She noted that it was important for the department to look good in front of the VPs. Then she shifted. She commented that the holiday party was a great opportunity for people in roles like mine, roles that were more process-oriented, to gain some visibility. She suggested I make an effort to speak with Mr. Harrison and the other executives. Her tone implied she was giving me helpful advice, coaching me on the finer points of corporate navigation. The subtext was clear. My contributions were invisible. I was a behind-the-scenes worker bee. She was the one who operated in the spotlight. I did not react, I simply nodded. "Thank you for the advice, Amanda," I said. My voice was level. My expression was neutral. I filled my mug with coffee and walked back to my desk. I could feel her eyes on my back. She was not just my rival anymore. I was her project. My quiet competence was an implicit challenge to her theatrical ambition, and she was determined to deconstruct it in front of an audience. It was then that I began to notice her specific line of inquiry. She would stop by my desk with questions disguised as a casual conversation. The questions all circled a single topic: the Northwood account. The Northwood account had been a difficult project from the previous year. It had involved significant budget overruns in its initial phase, a fact that was briefly a point of concern for mid-level management. The issues were resolved quickly and quietly, the project was completed on time, and the client was retained. The final report was a success story. Amanda, however, was not interested in the final report. She asked about the initial resource allocation. She asked about the early projection models. She mentioned hearing rumors that a major miscalculation had almost derailed the entire account. She was fishing. She was building a case, searching for a specific piece of flawed information she could weaponize. What Amanda did not know, because the details were never made public, was the source of the miscalculation. It had not come from my department. It had come from the logistics department, which had provided faulty initial data. I had been the one to identify the error. To avoid a politically damaging interdepartmental conflict, I had worked for 72 hours straight, rebuilding the entire project framework from the ground up, absorbing the error and correcting for it without ever formally assigning blame. My department head knew. The head of logistics knew, and he was grateful. The problem vanished before it could reach the executive level. I had saved the company a significant amount of money and a valuable client, and I had done so by being discreet. Amanda had a piece of the story, but not the whole story. She had the rumor of a failure, and she had decided I was the author of it. In her mind, it was the perfect weapon. It was an old mistake, difficult to disprove in a social setting. It would paint me as incompetent in a way that my current work could not. It would be the centerpiece of her public narrative. I saw her plan with perfect clarity. At the holiday party, surrounded by our colleagues and most importantly by senior leadership, she would find her moment. She would bring up the Northwood account. She would frame it as a lighthearted remember when story. She would praise me with false sincerity for overcoming the challenges of that project, while artfully inserting details about the near-disastrous budget miscalculation. She would make it sound as though I had made a colossal error, one that had jeopardized a key account, and had been lucky to escape the consequences. She would make me look like a fraud who had been hiding a secret failure. In the noise and cheer of a party, a detailed rebuttal would be impossible. I would look defensive and flustered. My silence, my default strategy, would be interpreted as an admission of guilt. The day of the party arrived. The office buzzed with a low-grade, festive energy that felt dissonant with the building's sterile architecture. Emails slowed. People stood in conversational clusters. I worked through lunch, finalizing my Q4 performance metrics. For me, it was just Thursday. At 4 o'clock, I locked my computer. I did not go home to change. My standard work attire, a tailored blazer, a silk blouse, and dark trousers was appropriate for the event. I went to the restroom and checked my appearance in the mirror. My face was calm, my expression composed. I was 42 years old. I had been with the corporation for 14 years. I had built a career on diligence, precision, and integrity. My strategy of silence had been predicated on a simple cost-benefit analysis. For 7 months, the cost of engagement had been too high. The equation had now changed. Amanda's escalation, fueled by my inaction, had created a scenario where silence was the most costly option. It would validate her narrative and cause material damage to my professional reputation, a reputation I had spent over a decade building. A new response was required. It could not be emotional. It could not be a lengthy, defensive explanation. It had to be as clean and precise as the work I produced. It had to be a single, data-driven point that would not just counter her narrative, but dismantle it completely. I walked out of the restroom and toward the elevators. The party was being held in the grand ballroom of the hotel connected to our office building. As I walked, I reviewed the facts. I reviewed the timeline of the Northwood account. I reviewed the email I had saved from the head of the logistics department, the one thanking me for my discretion and my extraordinary effort. I had the data, I had the documentation, and I had the sentence. The ride to the hotel was short. I watched the city lights blur past the window. My hands rested in my lap, perfectly still. There was no tremor. There was no elevated heart rate. My strategy of silence had been a failure. It had been based on the assumption that truth was a constant, that good work was its own defense. This assumption was incorrect. My silence had not been interpreted as professional restraint. It had been interpreted as weakness. It had created a vacuum, and Amanda had filled it with her own narrative. Tonight, I would correct the record. It was a simple matter of data integrity. My career was a data set. Amanda was introducing corrupted information. The problem required a single, clean line of code to fix. The event was held in the grand ballroom of the Omni Parker House. The corporation favored the venue for its air of old-world legitimacy. High ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and thick carpets absorbed the sound, creating a muted, serious atmosphere. It was a physical manifestation of our corporate culture, polished on the surface with a heavy, wadded silence underneath. I handed my coat to an attendant. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I did not drink alcohol at company functions. It was a variable I could control. I scanned the room. It was a familiar ecosystem. The department heads formed tight circles near the center. The junior associates hovered near the perimeter, observing the power dynamics. Mid-level management, my cohort, navigated the space between, forging temporary alliances and exchanging information. This was not a party. It was a resource allocation meeting with better lighting. I saw Mr. Harrison, our chief operating officer, speaking with the head of marketing. I saw my own department director, Mark, laughing with the team from the European division. These were the people whose perception mattered. Their opinions formed the invisible architecture of the corporate structure. My goal had always been to be a stable, reliable part of that structure. Amanda's goal was to be the most visible one. I found her near the main bar. She was holding a glass of champagne, gesturing with it as she spoke to a small group. Her audience was carefully selected. It included 2 senior project managers from other departments and, most importantly, David Chen, the vice president of strategy. He was a direct report to Mr. Harrison and was known to be his protege. Amanda had positioned herself perfectly. She was animated, her laugh a little too loud, her expression one of dazzling confidence. She was performing. I watched her, and I felt nothing but a quiet sense of inevitability. This was the culmination of her project. Her project was me. I made a slow circuit of the room. I exchanged pleasantries with colleagues. One asked about the timeline for the next phase of Project Phoenix. I gave him the key dates. Another complimented the data visualization in my last quarterly report. I thanked him. My interactions were brief, professional, and grounded in my work. I was reinforcing my own data points. I was Laura Bennett. I was competent. I was reliable. Each quiet conversation was a counterweight to the performance across the room. I knew Amanda had seen me. I had registered the brief, sharp flicker in her eyes as I entered. It was the look of a predator confirming the location of its prey. She let me circulate for another 10 minutes. It was a calculated delay. She was allowing me to embed myself in the social fabric of the room before she attempted to rip me out of it. Then she made her move. She began to steer her group in my direction. The movement was subtle, engineered to look like a natural migration across the room. David Chen, the VP, was at her side. She kept him engaged with a steady stream of conversation. As they approached the small group I was speaking with, Amanda raised her voice slightly, creating an interruption that was impossible to ignore. "Laura!" "There you are," she said. Her smile was wide and bright. It did not reach her eyes. The 2 conversations merged. My small circle was absorbed by hers. I was now standing at the center of an audience of 7, including a vice president. The trap was set. I looked at Amanda. I waited. She let a moment of silence pass, allowing all attention to settle on me. Then she turned to David Chen, but kept her eyes on my face. Her tone shifted to one of mock sympathy. "I was just telling David how indispensable you are, Laura," she began. The words were a veneer, especially your ability to handle difficult situations with such discretion. David Chen offered me a polite, neutral smile. He was listening. Everyone was listening. Amanda took a small sip of her champagne. "I always think back to the Northwood account. That was a real trial by fire, wasn't it?" The name of the project hung in the air. I saw a flicker of recognition on the faces of the other project managers. The Northwood account was a piece of company lore. It was the project that had almost failed. It was the one with the catastrophic data error that was caught at the 11th hour. The official story was vague, attributing the save to a team effort. Amanda was now offering a more specific version. "It took real courage to take responsibility for that data miscalculation the way you did," she continued, her voice layered with false admiration. "To put your name on it and shield the rest of the team. So many people would have pointed fingers, but you just quietly took the fall. I've always admired that. The attack was elegant. It was a masterclass in passive aggression. In one smooth motion, she had painted me as incompetent but noble in my failure. She had defined me as the source of a near disaster and simultaneously praised me for it, making any defensive response seem ungracious. She had framed me as a good soldier who had fallen on her sword, not a leader who had solved a problem. She was not stealing my work this time. She was poisoning its history. The silence that followed was immense. It felt absolute. In that quiet, I saw the narrative take root. I saw the slight shift in David Chen's posture. I saw the curiosity and faint pity in the eyes of my peers. They were looking at me, waiting for my reaction. They expected a denial, an awkward justification, or a flustered silence. They expected me to be embarrassed. I held Amanda's gaze. My own expression remained neutral. I processed her words as I would any other data set. The premise? I made a major error on the Northwood account. The secondary premise? I covered it up to protect others. The conclusion? My work is flawed and my silence is an admission of guilt. My analysis was complete. The premises were false. The conclusion was therefore invalid. It was time to execute the correction. I did not break eye contact with Amanda. I let the silence stretch for one more second, making it her silence, not mine. Then I turned my head slightly to address the Vice President of Strategy directly. My voice was calm and measured, the same tone I used to deliver quarterly findings. "Mr. Chen," I said, "the confidential addendum I sent to Mr. Harrison's office detailed how I discovered and corrected the critical coding error in the engineering department's source file." I paused. "I still have my copy of his thank you note, if you'd like to see it." It was one sentence, followed by a simple offer. The effect was not loud. It was a quiet, seismic shift. The narrative did not just crumble. It was annihilated. Every eye in the small circle moved from me to Amanda. My statement contained several key data points that Amanda could not have known. First, that a confidential addendum existed. Second, that it went directly to the COO. Third, that the error was not mine, but originated in an entirely different department. Fourth, and most devastatingly, that my action had been recognized and commended at the highest level of the company, completely outside the normal channels of communication Amanda monitored so obsessively. I had not called Amanda a liar. I had not been defensive. I had simply stated a fact that proved my competence, my discretion, and my direct value to senior leadership. And in doing so, I revealed Amanda's story for what it was, a fabrication built on ignorance. She had tried to define my past and had only succeeded in exposing the limits of her own knowledge. David Chen's neutral expression sharpened into one of keen interest. He looked at me, then at Amanda. A small, almost imperceptible nod was his only response to me. It was enough. It was confirmation. Amanda's face was a ruin. The bright, confident smile collapsed. A flush of crimson crept up her neck. Her eyes, which had been so sharp and predatory, were now wide and vacant with shock. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She was a performer whose stage had just vanished from beneath her feet. The other managers in the circle suddenly found the ceiling architecture fascinating. They looked anywhere but at her. I had corrected the data. My work here was done. I gave a polite general nod to the group. "Excuse me," I said, my voice still level. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I moved through the party, the muted sounds of conversation washing over me. I retrieved my coat from the attendant and stepped out into the cool night air. I felt no triumph. I felt no anger. I felt only the quiet, grim satisfaction of a problem solved. The system had been corrupted. I had run the diagnostic and executed the command. The integrity of the record was now restored. The consequences of that action were yet to be seen. It was an outcome I could not yet predict. The music seemed to lower in volume. Or perhaps it was only the sudden absence of conversation in our immediate vicinity. The small circle we occupied, which had been a hub of light chatter, was now a vacuum of silence. All eyes were on Amanda Pierce. Her smile was gone. It had not faded. It had been erased. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, taut mask. I observed a slight tremor in the hand that held her wine glass. For a moment, she looked from me to Mr. Harrison, as if expecting him to intervene, to dismiss my statement as a technicality. He did not. Mr. Harrison's attention had pivoted entirely to me. His expression was one of intense professional curiosity. The jovial party hose had been replaced by the Vice President of Operations. He adjusted his glasses, his gaze sharp and analytical. He was processing the new data I had just provided. He looked back at Amanda. He said nothing to her. The silence was the response. In our corporate environment, direct confrontation was rare. A lack of acknowledgement was a far more potent tool. It was a form of erasure. Amanda understood this language. She opened her mouth and closed it. There were no words that could recalibrate the situation in her favor. Any attempt to argue would only amplify her error in judgment. Any apology would be an admission of her calculated attack. Her only remaining move was a strategic retreat. She gave a tight, mechanical nod. She reported that she needed to find a colleague, a vague and transparent excuse. She turned and walked away, her posture rigid. She did not look back. No one watched her go. Instead, their attention remained on me. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a quiet, clinical sense of finality. The event had concluded. A variable had been introduced, and the equation had been solved. Mr. Harrison turned his full attention back to me. His voice was low and direct, meant only for me. He stated that he had been unaware of the full context of the Northwood account resolution. He then said that my office calendar would have a new meeting invitation for Monday morning. It was not a request. He then nodded, the interaction complete, and smoothly rejoined a different conversation circle. His social demeanor reactivated. The moment was over. The tension dissipated. Other colleagues who had been silent observers began to offer quiet, brief acknowledgments. A senior project manager from another division gave me a small, respectful nod. As data analyst, I had collaborated with once before met my eye and gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. These were the subtle currencies of our workplace, small signals of alliance and respect. They were acknowledgments not of a social victory, but of professional competence finally being brought into the light. I didn't linger. My objective for the evening had been met, though not in the way I had originally planned. My plan had been to simply exist, to fulfill my social obligation. Instead, I had been forced to act. I made my own quiet excuses and retrieved my coat. The drive home was silent. I did not turn on the radio. I simply processed the evening's events. My strategy had always been one of non-engagement. I operated on the belief that my work was its own defense. It was a solid, verifiable body of evidence that could withstand any rhetorical assault. My performance reviews were exemplary. The data from my projects was irrefutable. I believed this was enough. This belief was about to be tested, but I had miscalculated. My silence was not being interpreted as professional confidence. It was being used as a blank canvas on which Amanda could paint her own narrative. She saw my lack of response not as integrity, but as weakness, an opportunity. The attack at the party was the culmination of this belief. She assumed my silence would continue, that I would be too cowed by the presence of a vice president to correct the record. It was a significant misreading of my character. I am not confrontational, but I am precise. Amanda's accusation was not a personal insult. It was an injection of false data into a public forum. My response was not an emotional outburst. It was a correction of the record, a data point entered into a flawed system. The fact that it had such a dramatic effect was a symptom of how distorted the narrative had become. The COO's email was my source file, the verifiable truth I had held in reserve. I had not planned to use it, but when challenged directly, I presented the facts as I knew them. It was the only logical response. The weekend passed in quiet solitude. I did not check my work email. I knew the digital shockwaves of the incident would be spreading, but observing them in real time was not a productive use of my energy. The meeting on Monday was the only event of consequence. When I walked into the office on Monday morning, the atmosphere was different. The change was subtle, but absolute. As I walked toward my desk, the usual low hum of morning activity seemed to pause. People looked up. The glances were not hostile or gossipy. They were evaluative. I was no longer just Laura Bennett, the quiet manager from Sector 7G. I was now a known quantity in a different context. Amanda's desk was perpendicular to mine, in the same open-plan pod for mid-level management. A zone of silence seemed to exist around her workspace. People who needed to speak with her did so quickly, their voices low, their posture formal. No one lingered. Amanda herself was the image of professionalism. Her posture was rigid. Her focus on her monitor was absolute. She was attempting to project an aura of uninterrupted workflow, to signal that the events of Friday night were an irrelevant social footnote. It was a brave performance, but it was not convincing. My own morning was different. Colleagues who typically offered only a passing nod now made a point to say good morning. Our department head, a man named David Chen, stopped by my desk. He was normally a man of extreme efficiency, his interactions brief and to the point. He asked about my weekend. The question was mundane, but the act of asking it was not. It was a signal. He was recalibrating his understanding of me. He made no mention of the party. He did not need to. At 10 o'clock, my calendar chimed. The meeting with Mr. Harrison, I gathered my tablet and walked toward the executive suites on the top floor. Mr. Harrison's office was large and minimalist, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the city. He was seated at his desk, not behind it, but at a small conference table to the side. The gesture was intentional, designed to make the meeting less of an interrogation and more of a consultation. He did not begin with pleasantries. He asked me to walk him through the final weeks of the Northwood account. I did. I presented the facts calmly and chronologically. I explained how the resource allocation error from the other department had created a cascade failure. I detailed a solution I had developed and implemented over a single weekend. I concluded by summarizing the final report and mentioning the COO's directive for discretion to avoid interdepartmental friction. I did not editorialize. I did not mention Amanda. I simply stated the facts of the project. He listened without interruption. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment, looking out the window. His focus was not on the social dynamics of the party. It was on the integrity of the project data and the chain of command. He finally turned back to me. He stated that discretion was a valuable trait. He then stated that allowing false narratives to take root was a liability. It compromised the company's ability to correctly assign resources and identify talent. My silence, he explained, while well-intentioned, had created a data discrepancy in the human resources ledger. Then he shifted topics. He brought up Project Phoenix. He said he had reviewed the preliminary framework. He noted that the core architecture was strong, but the resource allocation and rollout strategy were, in his words, overly ambitious. This was Amanda's contribution. He looked directly at me. He informed me that effective immediately, Project Phoenix was being restructured. The project would now have a single point of oversight. That point of oversight would be me. Amanda and the rest of the team would now report to me on all matters related to the project. My role was to stabilize the projections and ensure a data-driven execution. It was not a promotion in title. It was a promotion in authority. It was a far more significant outcome than I had anticipated. He was not just correcting the record. He was reconfiguring the power structure based on the new information. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. He told me that HR would formalize the new reporting structure by the end of the day. As I walked to the door, he added one final comment. He said that good work should always speak for itself, but that sometimes it needed a translator. I walked back to my desk. I sat down and looked at the blinking cursor on my screen. I had not sought this outcome. I had not planned a corporate coup. I had simply corrected a piece of misinformation. The consequences were a logical result of that correction. Amanda had built her ascent on a faulty foundation. When one critical support was removed, the entire structure collapsed. It was not a victory. It was a necessary adjustment to the corporate structure, an adjustment I had finally learned to make myself. My walk back to my desk was a study in controlled motion. The plush corporate gray carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps. The open plan office was a landscape of muted activity, the soft clatter of keyboards, the low hum of the ventilation system, the distant ring of a phone in another department. It was the same environment I had navigated for years, but the internal topography had shifted. The map I had been using was now obsolete. Mr. Harrison's final words echoed in my mind. Sometimes good work needs a translator. It was a simple, almost dismissive phrase, but it landed with the weight of a formal diagnosis. For years, I had operated under the assumption that competence was its own language, that results were universally understood. This belief was not just a professional strategy. It was a core component of my personality. I did the work was good, the work should be enough. Mr. Harrison had just informed me, in the politest way possible, that I had been speaking a language no one in senior leadership was fluent in. Amanda, for all her flaws, understood the corporate dialect of visibility. She was a master translator. Her error was in translating a story that was not hers to tell. Amanda was at her desk. I saw her before she saw me. Her posture was rigid. Her focus was directed intensely at her monitor, a performance of diligence that was meant to be observed. She was projecting an image of someone unbothered, someone already moving on to the next task. It was a familiar tactic, but the slight, almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders told a different story. She was waiting. The entire department was waiting. News in a corporate environment does not travel. It materializes, seeping through the walls and network cable until it is simply a known fact. The outcome of my meeting with Mr. Harrison was already part of the office atmosphere. I sat down at my own desk, the leather of my chair sighing softly. I did not look at her. Instead, I opened my email client. There it was. The official notice from Mr. Harrison's executive assistant. It was a masterpiece of corporate communication, a memo that announced a tectonic shift in power with the blandness of a cafeteria menu update. The new initiative, codenamed Project Phoenix, was being fast-tracked. Laura Bennett was assigned as project lead, with full authority over strategy and resource allocation. All associated personnel, including Amanda Pierce, would report directly to me for the duration of the project. I read the email twice. The words were clear and direct. They were the formal codification of my victory at the party. Yet I felt no elation. I felt only the heavy responsibility of a new unwanted role. I was no longer just a manager. I was now a manager of my own antagonist. My first action had to be precise. It had to establish the new order without appearing triumphal or vindictive. That was not my style, and it would give Amanda an opening to frame me as a tyrant. My authority had to be presented as a simple, unassailable fact. I sent a calendar invitation for the following morning. The subject line was neutral. Project Phoenix Kickoff Meeting. The list of attendees was precise. My name was listed as the project lead. Amanda's name was listed under mine, alongside the other team members who would be assigned to the initiative. I did not add any text to the body of the invitation. The structure of the attendee list was message enough. I clicked send. Less than a minute later, a notification appeared. Amanda had accepted the invitation. No comment, no hesitation. The first move on the new board had been made. The rest of the day passed in a state of suspended animation. Colleagues who normally would have stopped by my desk with casual questions sent emails instead. Conversations in the nearby kitchenette fell silent when I approached to refill my water bottle. I was no longer just Laura. I was a case study in corporate survival, and they were all observing the outcome. They were not hostile, they were cautious. They were recalibrating their own positions relative to mine and Amanda's. The next morning, I arrived at the designated conference room 10 minutes early. I connected my laptop to the projector and brought up a single slide. It was a title slide, Project Phoenix, Project Charter, and Initial Deliverables. It was stark, professional, and devoid of any personality. It was a statement of intent. The work would be the focus. The team filed in. They were good people, specialists in data analysis and logistical planning. They avoided my eyes and Amanda's, finding intense interest in their notepads and phones. They were civilians caught in a quiet crossfire. I made a mental note to reassure them, to insulate them from the political fallout as much as possible. Amanda was the last to arrive. She entered exactly 1 minute before the scheduled start time. It was a power move, subtle but clear. It communicated that she was busy and important, her time too valuable to be spent waiting. She took a seat at the far end of the table, directly opposite me. She placed her laptop on the table and opened it, her movements economical and sharp. She did not look at me. She looked at the screen, her expression one of professional focus. I began the meeting on time, to the second. My voice was level. I did not acknowledge the events of the party. I did not acknowledge the new reporting structure in any explicit way. I simply began. I articulated the goals of Project Phoenix as outlined by Mr. Harrison. I detailed the timeline, the budget, and the expected outcomes. I presented the project charter, a document I had drafted the night before. I was in my element, discussing data, processes, and resource management. This was the language I was fluent in. Then I assigned the initial tasks. I went around the table, giving each team member a specific area of responsibility. I saved Amanda for last. Amanda, I said, my tone unchanged, your initial responsibility will be to collate and verify the foundational data from the Northwood, Bridgewell, and Easton accounts. We need to ensure complete data integrity before we build our predictive models. I'll need your preliminary report by end of day Friday. The room became unnaturally still. I had assigned her a task that was, in corporate terms, beneath her. Data collation was work for a junior analyst, not a manager of her seniority. It was a tedious, detail-oriented, and unglamorous job. It was also a critical one. Any error in her work would poison the entire project from the start. I watched her. I was not looking for an emotional reaction. I was analyzing her response. Her face remained a professional mask. Her fingers rested on her keyboard. For a long moment, she did not move. The silence stretched. The other team members stared at the polished surface of the conference table. Then she spoke. Her voice was as calm and professional as mine. Understood, she reported. I'll need full administrative access to the legacy servers to pull the raw data sets. My current permissions are insufficient. It was a test. She was asserting a need, probing the boundaries of my new authority. She was also correct. It was a reasonable request. I have already submitted the access request on your behalf, I replied, my gaze steady. It was approved by IT security this morning. You should have received a notification. A flicker of something surprise or perhaps frustration passed through her eyes before it was suppressed. It was there for less than a second, but I saw it. I had anticipated her move. I had acted first. I had demonstrated that I was not just leading the project, but managing every detail of its execution, including her. She gave a single sharp nod. Thank you, she said. The words were polite. The tone was ice. The meeting concluded shortly after. The team dispersed quickly, relieved to be released from detention. I remained, packing up my laptop. I had survived the first encounter. I had established my authority factually, without emotion. I had set the terms of engagement. For the next 2 days, Amanda was a model of compliance. She worked with a silent, ferocious intensity. She did not speak to me. She did not speak to anyone. She simply worked. I received automated notifications as she accessed the data archives, her digital footprint a trail of meticulous activity. On Friday afternoon, precisely at 4 o'clock, an email from her arrived in my inbox. The subject was Preliminary Report, Project Phoenix Data Collation. The body of the email was empty. There was only a single attachment, a compressed folder containing hundreds of spreadsheets. There was no summary, no executive brief, no explanation of her methodology. It was just raw data, dumped into a folder and sent. It was a classic form of passive resistance. Malicious compliance. She had done exactly what I had asked. She had collated the data. But she had presented it in the most unhelpful way possible, a data swamp designed to take me days to navigate. She was creating a bottleneck, forcing me to either do the analytical work herself or to come back to her, admitting she had provided insufficient work. It was a move designed to make me look like an incompetent manager to the rest of the team. The old Laura would have sighed, canceled her weekend plans, and spent the next 48 hours sifting through the files herself. The old Laura would have done the work to keep the project on track, silently absorbing the extra labor and the implicit insult. I looked at the email. I looked at the attachment. Then I stood up and walked over to her desk. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral, feigning surprise. I did not speak. I simply forwarded her own email back to her from my phone. A moment later, it appeared on her screen. Then I returned to my desk. I sat down. I waited. 5 minutes passed. Then I wrote a new email, addressed only to her. Amanda, the email began. As per standard project management protocols, all reports must include an executive summary, a methodology brief, and a key findings section. Please provide the revised report in the correct format by 9 a.m. Monday. This will ensure we can all move forward with the next phase of deliverables without delay. Thank you. I hit send. I had not accused her. I had not displayed anger. I had simply stated the professional standard and given a clear, non-negotiable deadline. I had documented her failure to meet that standard. I had created a paper trail. I was translating. I was learning the language. My email was sent. The deadline was set. It was an unambiguous statement of my new authority, documented and delivered. The subsequent silence was heavy with implication. In our line of work, response time is a metric. A quick reply often signals engagement or deference. A delayed one can signal contemplation, defiance, or strategic neglect. I did not expect a quick reply from Amanda. I had given her until noon the following day. It was a reasonable time frame for the task I had assigned. To distill a vague concern into a specific one-page report outlining the dependency, the potential impact, and the point of contact in the data analytics department, it was a fundamental task for any manager. It was work that should have been done before she ever flagged a critical dependency in the first place. I spent the morning working on the project charter for Phoenix. I refined the scope, outlined the key performance indicators, and began mapping out resource allocation for the first phase. My focus was absolute. I treated the impending deadline with Amanda as just another item on a project plan, a task with a clear owner and due date. To do otherwise would be to grant it more power than it deserved. Her behavior was a variable to be managed, not a crisis to be reacted to. My internal analysis suggested 3 probable outcomes. First, Amanda would comply. She would deliver the report as requested, a quiet admission of her new subordinate role. This was the most efficient outcome, but the least likely. It was not in her character. Second, she would attempt to escalate. She might try to schedule a meeting with Mr. Harrison, framing my request as micromanagement. This was a high-risk maneuver for her. Mr. Harrison had personally engineered this corporate structure. Challenging it so soon would reflect poorly on her judgment. Third, she would engage in a more subtle form of non-compliance. This was the most probable. At 11:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the deadline, an email from Amanda arrived. The subject line read, "Data Analytics Dependency, Raw Data Compilation." She had copied the other 2 managers on the Project Phoenix team. The body of the email was brief. It stated that in the interest of full transparency, she had compiled all relevant communications and preliminary data streams connected to the analytics department. Attached was not a one-page report, but a compressed file that was nearly a gigabyte in size. I understood the tactic immediately. It was malicious compliance, executed with a veneer of proactive diligence. She had not provided the concise, actionable intelligence I had requested. Instead, she had buried it. She had performed a data dump, overwhelming me with raw, unfiltered information. The message was clear. That the answer is in there somewhere. If you are competent enough, you will find it. By copying the other managers, she was creating an audience. If I complained, she could feign surprise. She could claim she was only trying to be thorough. If I failed to extract the necessary information, she could imply that I lacked the analytical depth to manage the project. I did not open the attachment. It was a trap, designed to consume my time and energy. Responding to her directly would pull me into a one-on-one conflict, a war of emails that she could later misrepresent. My old strategy would have been to quietly perform the analysis myself, to work late and extract the single piece of useful data from her mountain of noise. It would have been the path of least resistance. It would have also validated her tactic and invited its repetition. That strategy was no longer viable. My new authority required a new methodology. The problem was not the data, it was the standard of work. This was no longer a personal conflict between Amanda and me. She was now a resource on my project, and her performance was a risk to its success. I needed to address the risk systemically. I looked at my calendar, I cleared the next 30 minutes. I then sent a meeting invitation to the entire Project Phoenix team, including Amanda and the other 2 managers, David Chen and Maria Flores. The subject was Project Phoenix Communication Protocols and Reporting Standards. The meeting was set for 1 p.m. that day. It was mandatory. I booked a small conference room. I arrived 5 minutes early and connected my laptop to the main screen. David and Maria arrived together, looking curious. Amanda arrived precisely at 1 p.m. She sat opposite me at the table, her expression neutral, her laptop open. She was prepared for a confrontation. She would not get one. I began the meeting on time. I did not mention her email. I did not mention the data analytics dependency. "Thank you for joining on short notice," I began, my tone calm and measured. As we formalize the structure of Project Phoenix, I want to establish clear and efficient standards for our internal reporting. Our goal is to maximize progress and minimize administrative drag. To that end, all risk and dependency reporting will follow a strict format. I projected a document onto the screen. It was a simple one-page template I had drafted in the last half hour. It had fields for issue, potential impact, proposed mitigation, and required stakeholder. Moving forward, Section, I continued, any team member who identifies a potential blocker must complete this form. The emphasis is on actionable intelligence, not raw data. For example, submitting a large volume of unanalyzed material is not an acceptable flagging of a risk. It creates noise, consumes valuable man-hours and duplicative analysis, and shifts ownership of the problem rather than solving it. Our process requires that the person identifying the issue also perform the initial analysis to define it. That is the standard of work for this team. I scanned the room. David was nodding. Maria was taking notes. They were experienced professionals. They understood the value of process and clarity. They had likely been frustrated by Amanda's methods in the past. Amanda's face was a mask of professional interest, but I saw the subtle tightening of her jaw. She was being corrected in front of her peers, but in a way that was completely impersonal and utterly unassailable. I was not criticizing her. I was defining the rules of the game for everyone. She could not argue against a call for efficiency and clarity without looking obstructive. This ensures accountability and allows us to address issues swiftly, I concluded. Are there any questions about the new protocol? The room was silent. Excellent. I will email this template to the team following this meeting. I expect it to be used for all future communications regarding project dependencies. I paused, then looked directly at Amanda for the first time. My expression was neutral. Amanda, this standard applies to the data analytics dependency you flagged. Please submit your analysis using this format by 4 o'clock today. Thank you, everyone. I closed my laptop and stood. The meeting had lasted 8 minutes. I had not raised my voice. I had not referenced her email. I had taken her passive-aggressive challenge and transformed it into a teachable moment about professional standards. I had reinforced my authority, established a clear process for the entire team, and reissued my directive to Amanda with a new, shorter deadline. I had taken her weapon, the audience she had created by copying the other managers, and used it to my advantage. They were now witnesses not to my supposed incompetence, but to her failure to adhere to simple professional standard. I returned to my desk. I felt a sense of clarity I had not experienced before. My patience had not been a weakness, but it had been incomplete. It had lacked a final, decisive step, the enforcement of a standard. Silence was only effective when paired with a consequence. At 3:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the new deadline, a new email arrived from Amanda. It was addressed only to me. The subject line was succinct: dependency report. Attached was a single document. It was the exact one-page template I had provided, filled out correctly. The dependency was minor. The solution was simple. It would have taken her 20 minutes to complete that morning. I reviewed the document. It was adequate. I replied with a single word: acknowledged. The battle was won. Her compliance was cold, a brittle sheet of ice over a deep reservoir of resentment. I knew this was not the end. It was merely the end of the beginning. Amanda was not the type to accept defeat. She would simply learn from it. She would adapt her tactics, looking for a new vulnerability, a different line of attack. But so would I. I had learned something too. I had learned that leadership was not just about doing good work. It was about ensuring that everyone else did as well. My new protocols were not a request. They were a condition of continued project participation. I outlined the system in a formal memorandum distributed to the entire Project Phoenix team. It detailed standardized file naming conventions, mandatory summary fields for all data submissions, and a weekly progress report template. Each deliverable was to be uploaded to a centralized, time-stamped repository. There was no ambiguity. It was a closed system designed to enforce clarity and accountability. The first week under the new mandate was quiet. Too quiet. My team members adapted with professional efficiency. Their reports were clear, their data organized. The system worked as intended, reducing friction and clarifying progress. It created a transparent workflow where contributions were self-evident. Amanda's compliance was absolute. Her submissions were models of perfection. Her files were named correctly. Her summaries were concise. Her data was formatted precisely according to the new standard. She submitted everything exactly on schedule, often an hour or two in advance. There were no more data dumps. There were no more vague emails. There was only flawless, frictionless adherence to the rules I had established. This perfection was more alarming than her previous insubordination. It was the compliance of a predator that has learned the boundaries of its cage and is now studying the lock. I knew Amanda. Her ambition was not a fire that could be so easily contained. It was a pressure that would find a new fissure. Her silence in our weekly team meetings felt heavy, a deliberate and conspicuous absence of her usual interjections. She would sit, laptop open, and nod at the appropriate times. She offered no critiques. She asked no pointed questions. She simply performed the role of a diligent subordinate. I did not trust it. My strategy had forced her into a corner, but it had not addressed the root cause of her behavior. Her resentment was a tangible presence in any room we shared. I felt it as a low-frequency hum of animosity that lay just beneath the surface of our professional interactions. I did not mention my suspicions to Mr. Harrison. Reporting that a subordinate is performing her job too well is not a viable complaint within the corporate structure. It would sound paranoid. It would make me appear unfit for the leadership role I had just been given. My success now depended on my ability to manage her, which meant I had to anticipate her. Project Phoenix was structured around 4 major milestones. The first was the initial data consolidation and market analysis phase. It was the foundation upon which the entire project would be built. An error here would not be a simple crack. It would be a foundational flaw that would compromise the integrity of the whole structure. The deadline for this first milestone was 6 weeks after my promotion. We were now in week 5. The pressure was mounting. My responsibility was to synthesize the individual components from each team member into a single, cohesive, strategic document for the executive committee. The most critical component was the competitive analysis, which was Amanda's primary responsibility. It involved analyzing market share, competitor spending, and consumer behavior trends to project a viable entry point for our new initiative. On the Monday of the final week, a full 4 days before the deadline, Amanda's final analysis appeared in the repository. An email notification followed a moment later. It was brief and professional. She informed me that she had completed her portion of the milestone and that the full dataset and her corresponding projections were available for my review. She noted that she had managed to finish early to give me ample time for the final integration. On the surface, it was the act of a thoughtful and proactive team member. It was also a red flag. Amanda did not do things to make my life easier. She did things to advance her own position. Delivering this critical piece of the project early served 2 potential purposes. First, it made her appear highly efficient. Second, it placed the burden of any subsequent problems squarely on my shoulders. If the milestone was a success, she could claim credit for her swift work. If it failed, she could argue that she had provided her materials with plenty of time for me to review and correct them. I opened her submission. It was a masterclass in presentation. The report was 22 pages long, complete with index charts and a clear executive summary. The corresponding raw data was organized into meticulously labeled spreadsheets. I spent 2 hours reviewing the document, and I could not find a single flaw in its formatting or stated logic. Her conclusions followed from her presented data. Her projections were aligned with the trends she had identified. It was airtight. My instincts, however, told me a different story. The analytical part of my brain, the part that had earned me my reputation, registered a faint dissonance. It was the feeling you get when you balance a complex equation and the result is a whole number. It is possible, but it is statistically unlikely. Amanda's analysis was too neat. The data aligned too perfectly. The market opportunity she identified was significant, but it felt convenient. I made a decision. I would not take her work at face value. I would spot check her sources. This was not standard procedure. As a project lead, I was supposed to trust the work of my team, especially when it was presented so competently. To redo her work was inefficient. It was a poor allocation of my time, which was already stretched thin. But the memory of the Northwood account was a permanent fixture in my mind. I had learned that a hidden error, whether intentional or not, becomes the responsibility of the person who fails to find it. I started with her primary source for consumer spending habits. Her report cited the Q3 industry-wide market survey from the Tannehill Group, a reputable data analytics firm we used regularly. I pulled up our firm's subscription to the Tannehill portal and downloaded the Q3 report. I began the tedious process of cross-referencing her spreadsheet against the source data. Line by line, column by column, for hours everything matched. The numbers were identical, the demographic breakdowns were accurate. My own paranoia began to feel like a liability. I was wasting valuable time chasing a ghost. I was about to abandon the effort when I noticed something insignificant. A footnote. In Amanda's spreadsheet, a data point regarding regional spending in the Northwest was marked with a double asterisk. In the source document, it was marked with a single asterisk. It was a tiny formatting discrepancy, the kind of error that could easily occur when transferring data. It meant nothing on its own, but it was a flaw. It was the first one I had found. My focus sharpened. Why was the footnote different? I scrolled to the bottom of her spreadsheet. The double asterisk corresponded to a note, data adjusted for seasonal variance, a standard practice. I then scrolled to the bottom of the official Tannehill report. The single asterisk corresponded to a different note, preliminary data, see Appendix B for revised figures. My blood ran cold. I navigated to Appendix B of the Tannehill report. It contained a 3-page addendum explaining that the preliminary Q3 data for the Northwest region had contained a calculation error and had been revised. The revised numbers were significantly lower. The consumer spending that Amanda's report presented as robust was in fact declining. She had not used the revised correct data, she had used the preliminary incorrect data. But it was not a mistake. I knew it was not a mistake. The footnote proved it. She had not simply copied the footnote from the original report. To do so would have exposed the data as preliminary. Instead, she had deleted the original footnote and replaced it with her own, fabricating a justification for the numbers she was using. She had knowingly and deliberately built her entire analysis on a faulty foundation. The error was not just hidden, it was camouflaged with a layer of plausible deniability. Anyone doing a cursory check would see the numbers match the main body of the Tannehill report. Only someone who reran the entire analysis from scratch or someone with an obsessive eye for detail would check the appendices. The implications were catastrophic. Her projections pointed toward a massive investment in a marketing campaign for the Northwest region. Based on her analysis, it looked like a guaranteed win. Based on the real data, it would be pouring millions of dollars into a failing market. It was a poison pill designed to detonate weeks or months down the line, long after this initial milestone was approved. When it did, the failure would be traced back to the project's strategic plan. My strategic plan. Amanda's perfectly formatted early submission would be her alibi. My oversight would be the cause of failure. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the server room outside my office the only sound. I had the proof. It was not an accusation based on tone or interpretation. It was an immutable, documented act of professional sabotage. I now understood her new strategy. It was no longer about public humiliation. It was far more sophisticated. It was about providing me with a perfectly wrapped gift box that contained a bomb, and then letting me present it to the board myself. My old self, the woman who endured years of passive aggression, would have quietly corrected the data. I would have fixed the error, submitted the milestone report, and avoided the confrontation. It would have been the path of least resistance, but that path had led me here. It had enabled Amanda's behavior to escalate from minor slights to career-threatening sabotage. Correcting the data was no longer enough. Fixing the spreadsheet would not fix the problem. The problem was Amanda, and a problem, like a flawed data point, must be isolated and addressed. The question was no longer what she had done, but what I was going to do about it. The proof was on my screen. It was not a single error, but a cascade of them, woven together with such deliberate precision that it was, in its own way, a masterpiece of deception. The dataset Amanda had submitted for the Project Phoenix feasibility analysis was a poison pill, designed to pass a cursory inspection, but to fail catastrophically upon implementation. The numbers she used for market penetration projections were not from the Q3 industry report she had cited. They were from a defunct competitor's marketing prospectus, from 5 years ago, an artifact I only recognized because I had been part of the team that analyzed that company's collapse. I cross-referenced the source file she had linked. The link was valid. It led to a document on the company's internal archive server. However, the document at that address was not the Q3 industry report. It was a repurposed template, a shell. Amanda had taken an old, unrelated file, stripped its contents, and pasted in the falsified data tables. She had then renamed the file to match the title of the legitimate report. It was a sophisticated forgery. She was counting on no one checking the file's metadata. I checked. The file's creation date was 2 days prior. The authentic Q3 report had been uploaded to the archive 2 months ago, and it resided at a different server address entirely. This was the undeniable proof. It was not an accident. It was not a mistake born of haste or incompetence. It was a calculated act of sabotage aimed directly at me. If I had built my project strategy on this foundation, the failure would have been absolute. The resource allocation would be wrong. The timelines would be impossible. The entire financial model would collapse. When it did, the blame would fall squarely on the project lead. It would fall on me. Amanda would have her victory, and my career would be over. My first impulse was a cold, quiet anger. It was a feeling that rose not in my chest, but in my mind, a pressure behind my eyes. It was the detached fury of a system analyst watching a malicious code execute. I observed the emotion, acknowledged its presence, and set it aside. Emotion was not a useful tool. I cataloged my options. The list was short. Option 1 was direct confrontation. I could walk to Amanda's desk, present the evidence, and demand an explanation. I dismissed this immediately. Amanda's primary skill was not analysis. It was plausible deniability. She would feign shock, then confusion, then hurt. She would construct a narrative of a technical glitch, a server error, a misunderstanding. She would turn my accusation into an attack, and the situation would devolve into a matter of her word against mine. It would be messy, unprofessional, and inconclusive. Option 2 was human resources. HR's function is to protect the company from liability. It is not an arbiter of truth. An HR investigation would be slow and disruptive. It would shroud Project Phoenix in a fog of conflict and suspicion. They would interview me. They would interview Amanda. They would interview others. The project would stall. Even if they eventually sided with me, the damage to the project's momentum and my own authority would be significant. Amanda could be terminated, but the victory would be Pyrrhic. Option 3 was to escalate to senior management. I could take my evidence directly to Mr. Harrison. He had shown faith in me with the promotion. This was a viable path, but it carried its own risk. It could be perceived as an inability to manage my own subordinate. It would be me bringing him a problem. While I had the proof, the act of presenting it would still frame the situation as an interpersonal conflict that had spiraled out of my control. I did not want to be seen as a manager who ran to a vice president to settle a dispute. I wanted to be seen as a manager who solved problems. I stared at the 2 file paths on my screen, the real one and the fake one. The solution was not in a confrontation or an escalation. The solution was in the system itself. Amanda had used the corporate structure to create her weapon. I would use that same structure to dismantle it. My strategy began to form. It was not my job to accuse Amanda. It was my job as project lead to ensure the integrity of the project. Her sabotage was not a personal attack to be avenged. It was a critical flaw in the project's foundation to be corrected. I would treat it as such. I would not expose a person. I would expose a process failure. I began to draft a memorandum. My language was sterile, professional, and devoid of any personal sentiment. The subject line was clear. Project Phoenix, mandate for foundational data integrity audit. I addressed it to Mr. Harrison, the other department heads involved in the project, and my own direct reports. Amanda's name was on the distribution list, buried alphabetically among the others. The body of the memo was concise. It stated that during a preliminary review of the project's foundational data, I had identified certain inconsistencies that required immediate and thorough verification. It explained that before we committed to the next phase of resource allocation, It was imperative that we conduct a full audit of all key data sets to ensure their accuracy in sourcing. I framed this not as a reaction to a problem, but as a proactive measure, a best practice for a project of this scale and importance. I was being prudent. I was being a responsible leader. The second part of my plan involved the execution of the audit itself. I could not conduct it. That would create a conflict of interest. I could not assign it to someone on my team, as that would foster internal suspicion. I needed an unimpeachable third party. I knew exactly who it would be. David Chen, a senior analyst from the internal audit department. David was a legend within the company, a man whose entire professional reputation was built on his fanatical attention to detail. He was famously neutral, methodical, and utterly immune to office politics. His findings were treated as gospel. I drafted a second email, a formal request to David's department head, CCing Mr. Harrison. I requested David's assistance for the Project Phoenix data integrity audit, citing the need for an independent and rigorous review. I attached my first memorandum as justification. This created a formal documented paper trail. My request was no longer a personal preference. It was a matter of official record. The final piece was the most critical. It was the mechanism that would compel Amanda to incriminate herself. I opened my project management software and created a new high-priority task. I assigned it to Amanda Pierce. The task was simple: compile and deliver a complete methodology and sourcing package for the feasibility analysis to David Chen for the data integrity audit, due by end of day tomorrow. She could not refuse the task. It was a direct order within the project framework I had established. She could not ignore it. The deadline was aggressive and its completion would be tracked automatically by the system. She was now trapped. To complete the task, she would have to provide David Chen with her sources. She could not point him to the falsified file, because a man like David would check the metadata just as I had. He would discover the forgery in minutes. She could not admit that she had fabricated the sources. That would be a confession. Her only option was to claim the data was lost or corrupted, an excuse that would crumble under the slightest scrutiny and immediately confirm her culpability. I had not accused her of anything. I had not spoken a word to her. I had simply done my job. I had initiated the standard quality control procedure and assigned a routine task. The system would do the rest. Her meticulously crafted poison pill would be neutralized, and the evidence of its creation would be brought to light not by me, but by an objective procedural audit. Amanda had assumed I would react emotionally. She had misjudged me. I was not reacting. I was managing. I reviewed the drafts one last time. The wording was precise. The tone was neutral. The logic was sound. I opened the memorandum to Mr. Harrison and the department heads. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was the culmination of my experience with Amanda. My silence had been misinterpreted as weakness. My single sentence at the party had been a defense. This action was different. This was control. I clicked send. Then I sent the request for David Chen. Finally, I approved the task assignment for Amanda. The notification would have appeared on her screen almost instantly. The audit was no longer an idea. It was a corporate directive. The process was in motion. All I had to do now was wait for the inevitable result. The email was sent. The action was irreversible. I watched the message disappear from my outbox and joined the permanent, unchangeable record of the corporate server. A process had been initiated. A mechanism was now in motion, and it was entirely out of my hands. My role had shifted from actor to observer. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, the kind that follows a decision long debated and finally made. The trap was not of my design. It was a standard corporate procedure. I had simply guided Amanda toward it. The following morning, the office atmosphere was unchanged. The low hum of the ventilation system, the rhythmic clicking of keyboards, the distant murmur of a conference call, all the familiar sounds of a typical Tuesday were in place. I saw Amanda at her desk, her posture as impeccable as ever. To an outside observer, she was the picture of diligence. I knew better. I analyzed her movements. Her focus was directed at her screen, but her mouse remained static for long intervals. She was not working, she was calculating. An hour after I arrived, a reply from her appeared in my inbox. The subject line was an echo of my own. Project Phoenix, Data Integrity Audit. The body of the message was brief and professional. She confirmed receipt of my instructions. She stated she would compile the necessary source files and methodology for the auditor. She expressed her full cooperation to ensure the integrity of the project. It was a perfect piece of corporate communication. It conveyed compliance while admitting nothing. It was exactly the response I had anticipated. My own reply was even shorter. I thanked her for her prompt confirmation. I did not add any superfluous language. The communication was a matter of record. By midday, the second part of the mechanism engaged. An email arrived from Human Resources, CCing both myself and Mr. Harrison. It announced the formal initiation of the data integrity audit for Project Phoenix. The assigned auditor was a man named David Chen from the Internal Controls Department. I had worked with his department before. They were known for being methodical, impartial, and exhaustively thorough. They were not interested in office politics. They were interested only in process and verifiable facts. The email specified a preliminary deadline. Mr. Chen required Amanda's complete data set and methodology documentation within 48 hours to begin his review. The timeline was now concrete. The abstract threat had been given a name and a deadline. I did not look in Amanda's direction. I did not need to. I could feel the shift in the office's low-grade energy field. The pressure, once a diffuse element in the atmosphere, was now concentrating over a single point. I focused on my own tasks, reallocating resources to compensate for the man-hours that would now be devoted to the audit. Project Phoenix had to continue. Its success was still my responsibility. Late that afternoon, a new email arrived from Amanda. The subject was quick sync. She requested a brief 10-minute meeting to discuss the audit's impact on the project timeline. It was a reasonable request. It was also the maneuver I'd been waiting for. I accepted the meeting invitation for 4 o'clock. My office. When she walked in, she closed the door gently behind her. This was a deviation from standard practice. Most brief syncs occurred with the door open, a signal of transparency. Her closing the door was an attempt to create a private, confidential space. It was a strategic choice. She did not sit down. She stood before my desk, her expression a careful construction of professional concern. She began by stating that she fully supported the audit. She said she understood my commitment to quality control. Her tone was helpful, collaborative. It was the same tone she used in meetings when attempting to reframe my ideas as her own. Then she pivoted. She expressed her concern that a full, formal audit might create unnecessary delays. She spoke of stakeholder perceptions. She worried that it might signal instability within the project team to upper management. Her arguments were logical. They were the exact points a concerned and dedicated team member would raise. She suggested an alternative. Perhaps she and I could conduct an internal review first, just the two of us. We could go over the data together, double-check the sources, and present a unified, verified report to Mr. Harrison. It would be faster, she said, more efficient. It would show leadership that we were a cohesive unit, capable of managing our own quality control. Her proposal was a lifeline she was throwing to herself. She was testing me. She was searching for any sign of weakness, any hint of my old non-confrontational self. She needed to know if the Laura who had remained silent for months was still in there, and if she could be coaxed back out. I listened without interruption until she was finished. My hands were resting on my desk. I did not fidget. I did not lean back. My posture remained neutral. When she fell silent, I let the quiet hang in the room for a moment. I looked directly at her. My response was calm and procedural. I told her I appreciated her perspective on efficiency. However, the decision had been made. A third-party audit was now a formal requirement to ensure absolute impartiality. It was, I explained, the new gold standard for high-stakes projects like Phoenix. I stated that Mr. Harrison was in full agreement, that this level of scrutiny was not a sign of instability, but rather a sign of our commitment to delivering a flawless final product. The process, I concluded, would proceed as outlined. I did not address her offer of an internal review. I did not acknowledge the subtext of her words. I spoke only of process. I gave her nothing to argue against, nothing to grasp. My adherence to corporate protocol was a smooth, featureless wall. I watched her expression as she processed my refusal. It was a subtle but profound shift. The carefully constructed mask of professional concern did not crack, but the light behind her eyes seemed to extinguish. She had played her last card, and it had been declined without comment. The trap was not only inescapable, it was indifferent. She held my gaze for another second, searching for something: anger, triumph, malice. I offered none of it. I was simply her project lead, enforcing a procedure. She gave a single, sharp nod. She stated that she understood. She thanked me for my time. Then she turned, opened the door, and walked out, leaving it open behind her. The private space she had tried to create was gone. I did not watch her walk back to her desk. I returned to my work, reviewing a budget projection. An hour passed, then another. The workday officially ended, and the office began to empty. I remained, finalizing my plans for the next phase of the project, the phase after the audit. At 7 o'clock, my inbox chimed. The email was from Amanda. The subject line was a single word: resignation. The body of the message was 2 sentences long. She was formally resigning from her position, effective immediately. She wished the company and the team the best in their future endeavors. I read the email twice. It was a white flag. It was a confession written in corporate language. She had chosen to exit the field rather than be publicly exposed on it. It was a logical, self-preservationist move. I felt no triumph. I felt no satisfaction. I felt only the quiet finality of a problem being resolved. I forwarded the message to Human Resources and to Mr. Harrison without comment. Then I shut down my computer. The office was dark now, silent except for the hum of the servers in the distance. The audit was no longer necessary. The poison pill had been located and its architect removed. Project Phoenix was safe. My work could continue. The email arrived at 8:02 a.m. It was from Human Resources. The subject line was concise: personnel update. The body of the message was even more so. It stated that Amanda Pierce had resigned from her position, effective immediately, to pursue other opportunities. It wished her well in her future endeavors. I read the email 3 times. There was no sense of triumph. There was no elation. There was only a quiet finality, like the closing of a heavy ledger. The conflict was over. It was a conclusion, not a victory. A problem had been identified, a process had been implemented, and the variable had been removed from the system. That was all. The third-party auditors delivered their preliminary findings to me an hour later. Their report was bound in a simple black cover. It was 22 pages long. The executive summary was on the first page. It confirmed what I already knew. The dataset Amanda had submitted for the initial phase of Project Phoenix contained significant, systemic fabrications. Key figures were not just miscalculated, they were invented. The report used phrases like deliberate data obfuscation and falsification of core metrics. It was a meticulously crafted instrument of professional annihilation, and the auditors had dismantled it piece by piece. They confirmed that had the project proceeded on this foundation, it would have resulted in catastrophic failure within the first fiscal quarter. The cost would have been measured in the millions. My career would have been the secondary casualty. I placed the report in a locked drawer in my desk. It was evidence, but it was also a reminder. It was the physical manifestation of a lesson learned. My previous strategy of quiet competence had been a vulnerability. It had created the vacuum that Amanda's ambition had tried to fill. My silence had been interpreted as weakness, an invitation for aggression. The audit, however, was different. It was not silence. It was the application of a system, impersonal and absolute. It was a machine that required no emotion to function. At 11:00 a.m., Mr. Harrison's assistant requested my presence in his office on the executive floor. The walk was familiar, but the context had changed. The last time I had been summoned here was to be given control of Project Phoenix. I was now returning as its sole, uncontested leader. Mr. Harrison's office was large, with a panoramic view of the city. He did not ask me to sit. He stood by the window, his back to the skyline. He held a tablet in one hand. He did not mention Amanda by name. He referred to the recent staffing change. He stated that the company valued results and integrity. He said that performative ambition was a liability. He had reviewed the auditor's preliminary findings. He looked at me directly. His expression was neutral, but his eyes conveyed a clear message. He understood exactly what had happened. He understood the nature of the threat Amanda had posed and the method I had used to neutralize it. He then spoke about Project Phoenix. He informed me that my budget had been increased by 15%. He was reallocating 2 senior analysts from another division to my team, effective Monday. He asked for my revised timeline now that the project had to be restarted from a baseline of 0. I told him I would have it on his desk by the end of the day. It was a conversation about resource allocation and data-driven timelines. It was the language of the corporation. It was the language I understood best. He concluded the meeting with a single observation. He said that good leadership was not just about producing work. It was about creating a structure in which good work could be produced safely. He paused, letting the statement settle in the quiet room. It was the closest he would ever come to acknowledging the political and personal battle I had just survived. He was giving me my new mandate. I was not just a manager of projects. I was now a custodian of process. I was a protector of the system. I thanked him and left. Back in my own office, I closed the door. The quiet was different now. It was not the tense quiet of waiting for the next attack. It was the quiet of a cleared board. For months, a significant portion of my mental processing power had been dedicated to anticipating, analyzing, and mitigating Amanda's actions. It was a constant, low-level drain on my cognitive resources. Now that capacity was free, I sat at my desk and considered Mr. Harrison's words. Creating a structure in which good work could be produced safely. My old belief had been simple. My work would speak for itself. It was a noble idea, but it was flawed. It was passive. It assumed a perfectly rational environment where quality was the only metric. The corporation was not that. It was a human system with all the accompanying irrationality, insecurity, and ambition. Good work did not speak for itself if someone else was shouting over it, or worse, claiming it as their own. Good work, I now understood, needed a defender. It needed a protocol. My silence had not been a strategy. It had been an abdication of a key leadership responsibility. I had protected my own work, my own integrity. I had failed to protect the process itself. I had allowed a toxic element to fester because I believed direct confrontation was unprofessional. I had been wrong. Direct confrontation was often messy and subjective, but systemic confrontation, using the established rules and procedures of the organization as a tool, was not. It was clean, it was decisive, it was defensible. The audit was not an attack on Amanda, it was a defense of data integrity. Her resignation was a consequence of her own actions when measured against that standard. This was the core of my new leadership philosophy. It was forming in my mind with the cool clarity of a flowchart. First, establish and enforce unimpeachable processes. For Project Phoenix, this meant mandatory peer reviews for all key data submissions. It meant a documented chain of custody for all source material. It meant regular, scheduled data integrity checks. The system would be transparent, it would be rigorous, it would be impersonal. Second, protect the team. My role was to be a shield. I would stand between my team and any external political interference. I would ensure they had the resources they needed. I would also ensure their work was properly attributed. There would be no ambiguity about contributions. Credit would be assigned with the same clinical precision as a budget line item. Third, redefine communication. My previous quietness had to be replaced. Not with noise, but with precision. I would communicate with my team, my peers, and my superiors with deliberate clarity. My reports would be factual. My emails would be concise. My statements in meetings would be data supported. There would be no room for misinterpretation. My silence had created a void. My words would now build a framework. At 2 p.m., I called a mandatory meeting for the Project Phoenix team. They filed into the conference room. Their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The news of Amanda's departure had spread quickly. They did not know what it meant. I stood at the head of the table. I did not sit down. I kept my statement brief. I informed them that Amanda Pierce had resigned. I announced that the initial project data had been found to be unreliable and was being discarded. We were starting over. I did not mention sabotage. I did not use the word falsified. The team did not need to be drawn into the drama. They needed to be insulated from it. I simply stated that a formal audit had revealed inconsistencies that failed to meet our standards for data integrity. The issue was resolved. Then I laid out the new way forward. I explained the new protocols for data submission and verification. I introduced the concept of mandatory peer reviews, framing it not as a lack of trust, but as a commitment to collaborative excellence and error reduction. I detailed a new reporting structure and the key performance indicators, KPIs, by which our progress would be measured. I made it clear that my primary role was to facilitate their work and remove obstacles. I told them that the project was high stakes, but the environment in which we would execute it would be stable, professional, and transparent. Their job was to produce high-quality work. My job was to ensure that work was all that mattered. I saw the tension in the room begin to dissipate. It was replaced by a focused attention. They were analysts, engineers, and strategists. They understood systems. I was speaking their language. I was not offering motivational platitudes. I was presenting a logical, secure operational structure. When the meeting concluded, I returned to my office. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. I looked at the locked drawer that held the audit report. I would not need to read it again. The lessons were now integrated into my own internal operating system. My name is Laura Bennett. I am the director of Project Phoenix. My competence was never in question, but competence alone is not enough. It must be protected by structure. It must be defended by process. My work would no longer just speak for itself. From now on, I would build the auditorium in which it could be clearly heard.